In this video, I'm going to write an AP U.S. History DBQ. I'm going to go after each of the 7 points of the rubric, and I'll explain to you exactly how I'm earning those points. If you want to follow along, check out the link in the description, and you can download this practice test to see the DBQ. Also, this is going to be a 1-hour video, so brace yourselves. It's a long haul. I'm going to set the timer now for 60 minutes. I have 15 minutes to work through the documents. So I'm just going to look at the instruction sheet. I always like to start here because it's kind of a reminder of everything that's on the rubric. It's almost like a checklist, so I don't forget anything. I get 15 minutes with the documents. I get 45 for the response. Now I'm going to jot down the time here. It's 3:45 p.m. where I am. In the test room, the clock might be over your shoulder or in front of you. You want to make sure you're paying attention to the time. So I have 15 minutes. I have till 4 o'clock to read the documents. First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to read the question multiple times. Once is not good enough. It says, evaluate the extent to which efforts to reconstruct the South immediately following the Civil War were effective in the period 1865 to 1877. Okay, I read that, but I wasn't really paying attention, so I'm going to read it again. Evaluate the extent to which, so how far along, one extreme, the other, somewhere in between, efforts to reconstruct the South immediately following the Civil War were effective in the period 1865 to 1877. So I need to figure out how effective Reconstruction was. Bringing the South back on board after the Civil War, was it effective? Was it not at all effective? Was it like completely effective or like in the middle? Okay, document 1, 13th Amendment to the Constitution, 1865. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, so this document is the 13th Amendment right after the Civil War, and it abolishes slavery. I'm familiar with this one already, and I'm going to be taking notes in the margin. Remember, on the real DBQ, it's going to be in pen. I'm using a pencil and an iPad, which you will not have, but okay, so I'm going to say 13th Amendment abolishes slavery. I'm just going to actually read the text. I think I know it, but it says Congress shall have the power to enforce this by legislation. Okay, the longer source here. Document 2 is the Black Code of St. Landry's Parish, Louisiana, 1865. So it's the same year as document 1. It's a law from Louisiana, and it's longer. So now I'm going to read this. 4 parts. That it says that no one who's African American shall be allowed to pass within the limits of the said parish without a special permit in writing. So you have to get permission to walk into this district of the city. You have to pay a fine of $2.50 or be forced to work 4 days on the public road or suffer corporeal punishments and provided here. So you get whipped or fined or sentenced to work if you walk in the wrong district. So this is segregation. I'm keeping little notes on the side, hoping to make connections between the documents. Number 2, anyone who's found absent from the employer. So there's a curfew put on African Americans. This is terrible. Fine, public road, same punishments. The 3rd one. So African Americans are prohibited from owning houses, to rent or keep a house. What does that mean? Okay, ejected. Okay, so no residence, more like segregation. Okay, I don't want to get too bogged down. And notice in section 3 of document 2, I got a little confused by what it said. I just moving past that. I got to keep moving. I have 15 minutes. I've used up 3 or 4 of them so far. Okay, section 4, payments, corporal punishments. Okay. Okay, so that African Americans are required to be in the regular service of some white person. Wow. So this is the end of slavery, but they're requiring in 1865 a re-enslavement of African Americans. So this is kind of like slavery isn't really over, which is one of the themes of Reconstruction, right? It's like slavery kind of kept continuing on. Source 3, Frederick Douglass, he's familiar. Reconstruction, 1866, so the year later. The author I know, he's an abolitionist. And now I'm just going to read this. Okay. Citizen of the state, citizen of the United States, blah, blah, blah. Republican, enunciation, blah, blah, blah. I don't understand this. Okay. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, so I'm gonna leave a question mark here. I find document 3 a little confusing, but I don't wanna get too bogged down in it, so maybe I'll come back. Okay, and then I have this cartoon, which is horrendous. 3 people with their feet on top of an African-American man, 1868. It's titled, "This is a White Man's Government." So, okay, so it's a political cartoon showing white supremacy in government. Document 5, 15th Amendment to the Constitution. Okay, also familiar. So, not abridging the right to vote. So, keeping my notes pretty short in the margins. I don't want to let them take over. Blah, 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 Congress. Okay, New York Times. Mr. Revels. 1870. So these documents are moving in a nice time order, as they often are. So that helps me figure out how to arrange them. Prevailed. So Mr. Revels is from Mississippi. He's an African-American senator. Mr. Revels showed no embarrassment whatever, and his demeanor was as dignified as could be to be expected under the circumstances. The abuse which had been poured upon him and on his race during the last 2 days might well have shaken the nerves of anyone. So this is a African-American senator. So one of the realities for African-Americans in Reconstruction is they start getting elected to office. This matters. That goes away basically at the end of Reconstruction. Senator from Mississippi. I'm also paying attention to individual states, right? Mississippi is not Louisiana. It's not all these things. Last thing is a cartoon. 1872, carpetbagger. Carpetbag. Okay, so I know what a carpetbagger is. It's somebody who comes from the North to kind of take advantage of the political weakness in the South. That's kind of good outside information. I want to keep that in mind. I'm not sure what to do with this. Now what I'm going to do is line up these documents real quick just to see the big picture. I like to take, it's only 7, right? So I got 2 amendments. Document 1 is the 13th Amendment. Document 5 is the 15th Amendment. I've got 1 newspaper account in document 6, 2 cartoons in documents 4 and 7. I have a law code in document 2, and I have an article from Douglas. So it's nice, so 2 amendments, 2 newspaper articles, 2 cartoons. I'm looking for parallels because I might be able to talk about that and brag about it in my essay. I have 6 more minutes. So I'm gonna go back to the document I abandoned because I didn't want to get lost in this. This is document 3, and I'm gonna read it out loud here so we can follow along. Frederick Douglass says, "Fortunately, the Constitution of the United States knows no distinction between citizens on account of color. Neither does it know any difference between a citizen of a state and a citizen of the United States. Citizenship evidently includes all the rights of citizens, whether state or national. If the Constitution knows none, it is clearly no part of the duty of a Republican Congress now to institute one." Something about citizens of states and citizens of the federal government. The mistake of the last session of Congress was the attempt to do this very thing. Okay, so again, if you can't understand every phrase in every document, don't beat yourself up. That's not what this is about. This is about, like, what can I say about this document to get the points I need? I can't read all the little words in document 7, but I can follow along, get the main idea. He says, "This unfortunate blunder must now be retrieved." From the previous end. "The mistake of the last session was to attempt to do this very thing by a renunciation of its power to secure political rights to any class of citizens, with the obvious purpose to allow the rebellious states, the southern states, to disenfranchise their colored citizens." So that's the problem. Allowing the southern states to disenfranchise, that means strip the rights away from their colored citizens. "This unfortunate blunder must now be retrieved, so that a legal voter in any state shall be a legal voter in all the states." So now I have a voting thing that ties me to document 5. So now at this point, with just a few minutes left, I'm going to look for connections among the documents. And I'll do this on the front page. I've got some room at the bottom. So I'm going to start building my points up this way before I start writing. Don't jump in writing thinking you're gonna like improvise all the points. Work from the checklist and build it from there. So I have document 3 and document 5 are about voting rights. And in fact, voting, also in document 6. Okay, now I have segregation. No, that's only in document 2 so far as I can tell. Okay. Political leader. Oh no, okay, so slavery, this is another issue, is under the heading of kind of slavery and the continuing of slavery. I'm gonna work with document 1, which outlaws slavery, and document 2, which basically requires slavery, document 2, section 4. Okay, so I've drawn a connection now between documents 3, 5, and 6 for voting rights, and I drew a connection between documents 1 and 2 for slavery. Okay, so now I'm gonna look at my, my rubric here and make sure I have a plan. I need to have a good thesis. I'm definitely gonna do that in my first paragraph. I'm gonna provide the broader context, also gonna do that in my first paragraph. And even though I have a couple minutes, I can't start writing yet. I gotta wait till the kind of clock to go out. So I'll start with my context. I'll go for the thesis. My thesis is gonna be, what was this question again? Evaluate the extent to which efforts to reconstruct the South immediately following the Civil War were effective. So they weren't that effective, right? Because you still have segregation, you still have white supremacy, as document 4 shows. But you do have in document 6 an African-American man, a senator from Mississippi, which is incredible, right? That you have an African-American senator representing a southern state a couple of years after the Civil War. So it was effective, and documents 1 and 5 show that the Constitution changed. So in fact, my thesis will be that it was a limited reconstruction because, why? Because although the 13th and 15th Amendments happened, which is documents 1 and 5, and you have African-American senators, which is document 6, still basically segregation and racism prevailed. And that's, for me, gonna be documents 2 and 4, and actually 6 as well. Okay, so that's my thesis. I still have 1 more minute here. I need to use all 6 documents, I know that. I need to come up with an outside document, which I don't know what I'm gonna do for that yet. And then I'm going to do this reasoning at the bottom here. Okay, so for my outside document, I'll come up with this before I start writing. What would be another document that helps me figure out Reconstruction? In the period 1865 to 1877. Well, you know, I've got a lot of newspaper articles, I got the amendment, I got cartoons. What about numbers? It's always a good thing if they don't give you a chart or graph on the DBQ, they normally will, to point to quantitative evidence. Like it's really, if it would be really nice to see what ordinary African Americans were going through, not just the one guy who's a senator. So I'm gonna go for that, which would be quantitative data on the effects of African American, I'll call them ordinary African American citizens. Maybe their economic lives. Did their economic situation improve? And now, this is really nice because I've used up my time, the 15-minute reading period. I'm gonna be writing in a minute in pen, but I'm going in, it's not beautiful, but it's a plan, right? I've got a thesis, I think I know what I'm gonna argue here. I've got my outside document prepared, and I know I've mapped all these documents out and I've drawn some connections. There's still plenty of thinking for me to do here, but I'm not going in blind. It's sometimes a good idea to just stay in the documents for a few extra minutes before you start writing to make sure that you have a real plan. Okay, so I'm gonna put this pencil down. I'm gonna grab this pencil thing, which I'm not gonna have on the test. Remember, it's a pen on paper, which is super awkward. You make a mistake, you gotta cross it out. So on my screen, which you'll be able to see, I will be crossing things out, not erasing them digitally. Okay, so I'm gonna start first paragraph on a DBQ. I'm always doing the same two things. I'm gonna write a pile of sentences that's gonna get me the contextualization point, and then I'm gonna write the thesis. Don't finish your first paragraph without them. So, contextualization. Throughout the ages, mankind has evaluated the extent to which... Okay, so I wanna provide context either before or after. I'll do maybe a little bit of both, and I'll start with like the situation leading up to 1865, what it was like for African Americans and this conflict between the federal government and the state governments. So I'll get to work on this now. So I started with the context of Southerners pursuing disenfranchisement of African Americans, but I want to add a little bit more to make sure the grader gives me the point. So I'm going to also point out the conflict between the federal and state governments. Okay, so I just put a second piece in the contextualization thing. I mentioned Dred Scott, fugitive slave laws, Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, and the nullification crisis during the presidency of Andrew Jackson, because I'm really trying to pile it on for the grader to see that I understand the bigger context. Reconstruction isn't just about the Civil War, it's about African-American suppression during the years leading up to the Civil War and the long-standing debates of states' rights versus the federal government. Now that I'm done all that, I want to transition to my thesis. Okay, so I just defined what Reconstruction was. I probably overdid it on contextualization, but always do that. Always shoot for a little bit more than you need to get the point. I don't want any grader to be able to walk away from this and not give me the point. So now I'm gonna get my thesis right. Before I start writing in pen here, I'm gonna take a minute and just make sure I have an actual kind of plan for this thing. So let's see, because this is the most important single point I'm gonna get in one or two sentences. And notice it says, respond to the prompt with a historically defensible thesis, so not like some fake history, that establishes a line of reasoning. So the thesis can't be, I'm right. The thesis is, I'm right because X, Y, and Z. And that's what I need to set up here. Okay, finally, I got it. Okay, so I have my thesis, I wrote it out here. I'm gonna copy it now in pen onto my essay. Don't try to work it out in pen here, so I'll read it out loud to you. It says, although African Americans did achieve concrete gains in the form of constitutional amendments and real political victories, the reality is that Reconstruction was only ever an incomplete process. When Reconstruction ended in 1877, African Americans were still left with few real political and social freedoms. So I've explained a sort of a middle of the road position. On the one hand, like there were some victories. At the end of the day, evaluate the extent to which efforts to reconstruct the South immediately following were effective. They were not effective. So actually, I'm gonna take that word effective and put it in here. Was only ever an incomplete process. That's not good. I'm gonna change it to that Reconstruction was not an entirely effective process. So I changed my language because I went back. This is the third or fourth time maybe now that I've read the question, and it makes sure that my thesis fits the question. Don't plagiarize the entire question and put it into your thesis, but don't let your thesis go off and make some other argument. I felt like I wasn't being specific enough. Now I know I'm gonna get the point. So I'm gonna write this down. Ooh, a lot of writing. And I'm trying to keep my handwriting neat. When I get tired, I get lazy, and then poor graders have to see this. Increasingly, the graders are looking at computer scans of your essays, so like, don't torture them with your bad handwriting. They don't grade you on it, but seriously, it's not nice. Reconstruction. Let's see, I've got it ended. Notice one thing, so I was just writing and I want to make sure I don't go off the margins of the page because they're only going to scan what you include in there. So people like to add little footnotes and stars and things. Don't do that. It's mean to the graders. Stay in the box, literally, so that the computer will read it if it's being uploaded. So my thesis is 2 sentences long, that's okay. It's at the end of the first paragraph, which is really the smartest place for it to be. Don't smuggle it into the third paragraph. You really want to get it nice and clear. Make it easy for the grader to make a check on their little rubric. In fact, I'm going to do that now. Yeah, so I've got my thesis point, I got my context point. Now my next 4, I've got to use at least 6 of the documents, my 1 outside piece of historical information. I got to source 3 of the documents, and then maybe my conclusion, I'm going to go after the analysis and reasoning points. So my thesis sets up a nice thing where I can use, in 1 paragraph, I can build the case for some of the concrete gains that African Americans got. Now I'm watching the clock. I have 31 minutes. That's plenty of time, but I got to get moving to get this paragraph done because I will not finish if I don't get all 7 documents and get my paragraphs together. So I got to get to work. One challenge I'm having is I'm starting to list the documents. The graders see that as a red flag. Like if you're just going document 1, document 5, you got to show that you're connecting them. So I'm going to take a minute and see if I can draw one of those connections. I'm citing document 1, which is the 13th Amendment, and document 5, which is the 15th Amendment. And since I studied, I know that the 14th Amendment was about due process and equal protection, so I smuggled that in there. 3, 5, 6, okay. Oh, okay, I'm gonna connect document. So document 5 guarantees African Americans the right to vote. Document 6 is an African American being elected because African Americans have the right to vote. So I'm gonna make document 6 a result of document 5. That's a way of building those bridges, trying to show that higher level of reasoning. There's basically a point on the DBQ for complexity, and I'm gonna try to go after it here. It's not like you earn it in one little spot of the essay, so I'm gonna try to give them a couple of signals. It's almost like a little trail of breadcrumbs, and I'm saying like, give me the point, please. Okay, so I just finished a nice paragraph that shows the positive part of Reconstruction, the extent to which it went well. I smuggled in documents 1, 5, and 6, kind of connected them to each other. I haven't done a lot of sourcing of the documents yet, so I have to make sure I do that for my next one. So I've got 3 documents up on the board. I'm going to keep a little tally here of which ones I've used. That'll help me. I've used 1, 5, and 6. And now I'll go on to the next paragraph. And here's what I'm going to show. So I showed on the one hand, like it went really well, and African Americans had all these rights and new constitutional amendments, hooray. And now I'm going to show the flip side of this, the dark side, which is that like it didn't really work out for them. So I'll make a nice transition to bridge the paragraphs. This shows the higher order thinking. So I'll say, although African Americans saw new rights enshrined in the Constitution, these changes were not long-lasting and did not survive. And were challenged almost immediately. This sets up my documents really well. And my hand is falling off. Okay. One thing you want to do in the test is like, sometimes just put your pen down, take stock of where you are. I have 23 minutes that I've been feeling the minutes go away, but I'm okay if I write really quickly and I can regain feeling in this finger. I'm gonna make it. And then I know it's kind of a race to make sure I get the last points. I've already earned 2. I'm about to lock in the next 3. Because I'm gonna go with the right documents, I'm gonna source them and go for the outside things. So I'm going right for the guts of the DBQ thing. Points 3, 4, and 5 for evidence. Okay. We challenge it almost immediately. Okay, so I'll start with, I'm gonna go chronologically. You don't have to move in time order, but you wanna move, I need to move. Okay, so. Now I'm gonna quote document 2, but don't quote too many words, right? It's the graders think that you're just filibustering and making stuff up. They have the documents in front of them, so I'm just gonna quote minimally here. Oh, and I kept notes on the side, so it's the segregation, curfew, no residence, and slavery. So I'm gonna go to the 4th part here, the slavery part, to show how it relates to document 1. What's nice about document 2 is section 4 is it's so explicitly trying to revoke what the Constitution did in document 1. So I'm always looking for those bridges again between the documents. So now I've got my 4th document up on the board. Now I'm gonna go to this difficult Frederick Douglass one. And the number 4, that gets me up to 6 documents used. By this point, I haven't sourced any of my documents, and source, remember, you can see it in the rubric, says, explain how or why the document's point of view, purpose, historical situation, and or audience is relevant to the argument. So I really gotta do this now, otherwise I'm not gonna earn the point. That's what's nice about checking the rubric over and over again. So Frederick Douglass is easy because I know he was an abolitionist before the war. Maybe I can say something about him. So I've been desperately trying to get all these points. One thing I did, document 4, is this cartoon, and it's a really horrible picture of 3 men standing on top of an African American. Rather than get lost in how infuriating this image is, I focused on trying to get the point for audience and context. This isn't an opinion poll about what you think about these sources or which side you're on. Like, I'm against slavery, obviously. They're asking me a very specific question. I'm focusing on that question. I've got a specific list of things I gotta do. I'm focusing on that list. So 6 documents, 1, 4, I've done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I've done at least 6 documents. I still haven't done my outside document. I have 11 minutes to do that. I've sourced, I think, 2 of them really effectively. So I'm gonna just, because I'm not sure that I'm gonna get all the points, I'm gonna go to these last The last one I haven't done, just to make sure I get it. So this is document 7. It's about carpetbaggers. I don't know how this fits into the overall picture. So, what do I say? Oh no, document 6, I'm gonna go back to document 6 because it shows Mr. Revels, this African-American senator from Mississippi, is being discriminated against. That fits into my argument that Reconstruction wasn't very effective. So I'm gonna do that real quick. Here I'm quoting the documents, but I'm trying not to quote too much because that's always a waste. All these words I'm writing are not my own, and so they might get in the way, but this is the only time I'm doing it. And my handwriting is falling apart. I have 7 minutes left. Good, I've used 6 of the 7 documents. I'm gonna mention in the final paragraph here a document that would help me. I'll smuggle that into the conclusion so I can get that point as well. I haven't used all 7 documents, which I normally like to do, but I might be able to get away with it. Okay. Here I'm going after the extra point for the outside evidence and complaining that the evidence that I was given wasn't sufficient. I'm explaining how this new evidence would fill a hole, and that's not just listing some random document I thought of. My description is a little bit vague, so I'm gonna start the next sentence specifically. So I'm gonna write a very short conclusion, not because I need to write a conclusion, because I want to just smuggle in document 7, and I want to indicate go after the reasoning point a little bit here. And I'm running out of time here, so I'm gonna just smuggle in the Compromise of 1877 just as a little more context in case I didn't get it the first time. Alrighty, did it. Oh, so that was exhausting. I think, looking back at this, how many pages did I write? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 iPad pages. When I did the real DBQ in high school, I wrote, I think it was 5 full pages. I wrote as much as I possibly could. And I did exactly work like this. It was a different rubric back then. It was a different setup, but I had a checklist. I made sure I got the contextualization point, the thesis point. I used 6 documents, I sourced 3 of them, I went after the additional document, and I corroborated, modified. I used that higher order reasoning. So even if a grader were to dispute this and take away one of my points, I still get 6 out of 7, which is plenty. That's more than I need to kind of go after the 5 here. But notice what I was doing overall. I kept my eye on the prize, which was the points. I wanted these points. I didn't want greatness. There's some awkward, clunky things I did here. I had to cross stuff out. I changed my mind a little bit, but my goal was each of these points. As I went through, I made sure that I was reading, and I have them all out of order. I was reading the prompt multiple times to make sure I answered that question and my thesis directly addressed it. I made sure I was counting my documents one by one and using them. I made sure I was connecting the documents to each other. So you'll see examples in here of how I'm I'm not just saying, here's document 1, here's document 5, but unlike this document is doing this, or the result of document 2 basically was document 3. That sort of approach helps me get those analysis and reasoning points. So I went after contextualization and thesis in the first paragraph, right? Those 2 points. In the next 2 body paragraphs, I went after all the evidence points. There's 3 of those. Even though I kind of smuggled the additional source into a later paragraph, I got those 3 points. And then with analysis and reasoning, I'm talking about complexity. I'm talking about these ideas in that broader way as part of the holistic way the essay is graded. So most of the points are kind of one by one, but along the way I try to leave these little crumbs, so I'm forcing the grader to give me the points. So I hope this has been useful for you. If you'd like more information, you can check that out at marcolearning.com, where we explain in detail how to earn all the points on the DBQ.